Movidiam podcast. Join the conversation with global innovators as they share their journeys, discuss the state of the industry, and share insight into the future of media for brands, agencies, and production companies.
Hello and welcome to the Movidiam Creative Leaders podcast. Today I'm delighted to welcome Chris Hirst, who is the Global CEO of Havas Creative. Chris, welcome to the Movidiam podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Chris, it's a particularly interesting time in the sort of in the world. I mean, we're in the middle of this sort of COVID issue, which is obviously very, very challenging for many small production companies and probably every business out there, really. But can we go back to the beginning before we kind of probably address that, which we need to do? Can we go back to the beginning of your career and how you decided that you're going into the creative world or the creative businesses?
Well, it's a slightly tortuous answer to that, but basically, I did a degree in engineering, which didn't entail, but in addition, I chose to do a year out between school and university, whereas most people, I don't know, trot off to Bali or wherever they go during the year out. I worked in a glass factory in St Helens, which is in the northwest of England, very industrial part of the country. So I worked in a factory in St Helens, which was actually as an apprentice, which was actually I really thoroughly enjoyed. But by the time I'd done a year there, and I then had done a 4-year degree in engineering, so it's 5 years after I'd left school, the one thing that I was certain of is that I didn't want to be an engineer and I didn't want to work in a factory. So I think that basically I chose advertising, not frankly knowing the first thing about advertising, nor the first. I had no concept that anything existed called the creative industries. But it just seemed, I think, as far away from a factory as I could get.
That's very that is very interesting. I mean, I actually studied physiology the night of doing medicine and ended up in a sort of production business. So these journeys are very very sort of wiggly, as I think people often highlight on LinkedIn. And today, you're author of a book called sort of No Bullshit Leadership. What was the sort of stimulus behind creating that? And it's probably an experience of your journey and coming across all sorts of different sorts of leaders and understanding and analysing them that kind of caused you to write that. What was the driver behind that?
Well, I suppose there was a kind of a catalytic event, which wasn't a very dramatic catalytic event, but there definitely was, which was I was asked to do a presentation to a group of young industry people at Cannes, at the Advertising Festival in Cannes in June 17, I think it was. And I was asked to do 20 minutes on leadership, kind of no big deal. But about 2 days beforehand, I found out that I was one of 3 people who'd been asked to do a 20-minute presentation on leadership, and I was the sort of the filling in the sandwich. There was somebody before me and somebody after me, and they were sort of very kind of important and luminous figures. And so suddenly I thought, oh shit, I'm actually going to have to. It sort of became competitive. I thought, how on earth am I going to say something that isn't just the same old bullshit that everybody talks about when they talk about leadership? So anyway, I did the presentation, all was well, if unspectacular, and I got home, and I was literally lying in bed, I think on the Saturday morning, probably a bit hungover, after a week in Cannes, and thought to myself, I wonder if there's a book in that, and as in the 20 minutes that I talked about. In fact, one of the slides, I only did 5 slides. Not many anyway. And one of them was a hand-drawn visual, which was my visual representation of leadership. And that actually forms a real center point to the book. And I, from somewhere, I don't know quite where, the idea No Bullshit Leadership came into my head. The idea that a lot of what you read and are told about leadership is just bullshit. And that actually is a problem. It inhibits those already in leadership positions from fulfilling their potential. And I suppose potentially worse than that, it excludes large parts of our societies from thinking that leadership is something that they could ever aspire to. And I suppose that was the starting premise. And I kind of started with that 5 slide, 20-minute presentation and the title, and went from there.
It's very interesting. Obviously, I mean, leadership is particularly in the papers just at the moment because the country's leader in the UK is currently in hospital, and we're in this COVID very, very challenging environment where people are locked down, and this kind of concept of everyday leaders is probably more prevalent as everyone is being asked to do very different things, and some people are rising to the challenge, and some people potentially aren't. I mean, so is the thesis or the outcome there is that the leaders are made or they're born, or what's your view there?
The thesis is that I think one of the great fallacies of the subject is that leadership is open only to a chosen few, and that that the only people who are leaders are generals, presidents, CEOs, and also the other kind of piece of mythology is that you have to have walked the Whitehall or sat around a boardroom table or attended one of the kind of great business schools in order to understand what leadership is. And I suppose that I'm calling bullshit on both those things. I think that leadership is difficult but not complicated. And anything that, and I think there's a lot of what I refer to as the leadership industrial that makes literally billions of pounds every year from telling us it's complicated. And of course, guess what? They're the answer to that complexity, that sort of self-created complexification. And my premise is that anybody that has people they're responsible for can consider themselves a leader, whether that be 3 people or 30,000 people, whether that be a Sunday league football team, an account director in an advertising agency, a head of department in a school, somebody who runs a ward in a hospital. And leadership, I mean, some people I think end up being more suited to leadership or better leaders than others, in the same way that, no matter how much you practice, some people are going to be better at the piano than others. Sure. But it's also true that if you're clear about what leadership is, and you're clear about what the tools you need to be an effective leader, everybody can improve and be effective and good at it. And actually, that's a really important thing for our societies. I mean, probably one of the first things I wrote the first line I wrote maybe 2.5 years ago was, "We need more better leaders than everywhere," which we need more better leaders everywhere, from our schools and hospitals to our businesses in our country. And I think they have turned out to be rather prescient lines given what's happening now. Yeah.
And to move it, we probably have to touch on that because this will be released probably during the period of lockdown. I mean, how is the agency landscape in general faring with this huge reduction or potential reduction in advertising investment from some of the largest brands in the world? I mean, what are some of the approaches that you're taking and your people are taking?
Well, I suppose there's a general and a specific. I mean, look, other than a very small number of quite specific businesses and industries, pretty well every industry and every business is suffering a lot right now. I think obviously some are suffering more than others, but everybody's feeling pain, and it's a unique situation, and people are feeling pain because people, for all the reasons I probably don't need to list. I mean, income is going down, fixed costs roughly remain the same, and stuck at home. So, yes, we can still continue to work, but it is not as effective as being able to, get into the office, travel to other places of the world, meet our customers, all those things. So it's difficult. I mean, nobody listening needs me to tell them that. Sure. I think on a sort of a general level, I suppose we are, I hope, doing a good job of all of the things that good businesses are doing. Good organizations, it's not just businesses. Good organizations are doing right now in a period where everybody's stuck at home. So how do we continue to create an environment where people can perform effectively whilst getting the right balance of their lives in a very complicated situation where many people have childcare issues, all those kind of things, where people, I think mental health is always a challenge, and I think it's a real challenge now for society, on all sorts of levels, but anxiety, being stuck inside, all those kind of things. So I think on a general sense, I hope we're doing a good job of being effective communicators, being empathetic listeners, being flexible in terms of how we think, how we work, how we engage our teams. So on a specific level, in the advertising industry, I think the industry, I think is always a bit of a bellwether, isn't it, in terms of this advertising spend is always a big, in inverted commas, discretionary spend on the balance sheet, and it throughout history has been first to be cut and then hopefully first to come back. And I think the industry is doing what a lot of industries are doing, which is accepting that Q2, again, pretty well globally, Q2 is going to be a very tough quarter, and trying to work out now. I feel like both we and our clients went through quite a period of sort of shocked, fast readjustment, where suddenly, within the space of 48 hours, it's like the whole world was working from home. It wasn't gradual. So that was a big shock. And I think now both we and our clients and other organizations I hear and talk to are starting to think, I think, a little bit more strategically in terms of the medium and long term. How are we going to making some good judgments about when we're going to come back? What world are we going to re-emerge into when we come back? How's that actually going to happen? How do we? It's certainly not going to be a switch that just gets flipped and suddenly we're all back in again. Use this time, and I think smart businesses use this time to strategize more, to really think about, okay, let's really get in and tackle structural, strategic challenges within our businesses that mean that we can re-emerge fitter, faster, stronger at the other end.
Yeah, very interesting, Chris, indeed. And I think definitely behavior is going to change. And as you say, it will, and perhaps there's a new emergent behavior out there. Certainly the remote working piece. I mean, there's certain businesses out there, these Zoom communications, for example, that has exploded, and not just with businesses, but with family members, etc. So there's this sort of expression people are using about sort of new normal. But I mean, obviously there will be a blend of both once things subside.
Yes, I think for sure.
And in terms of the specifics of the actual, the advertising sort of model and the large agency model and some of the in-housing things that are going on, you're seeing brands beginning to take headhunt agency staff into the brands and things like that. How does your Havas and your experience kind of treat that, and how you what are your concerns about the things that you're seeing happening as people talk about structural change in the industry?
Do you mean with regard to in-housing?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's going to be quite interesting to see what happens with that coming off the back of COVID. I think it's my view on in-housing. I mean, it varies by different parts of the sector. I mean, the marketing services is quite a big, broad space. But you kind of, I suppose, if to try and generalize, you might say, okay, there's the creative half and the media half, and I think that the in-housing trends we're seeing are rather different across both, because we are obviously also seeing clients. Typically, when people talk about in-housing, they mean creative, but also we're seeing media in-housing as well to an extent.
Yeah.
Which I think is relatively new. Now, in-housing isn't a new thing. I mean, it's like everybody, I don't know, like 18 months ago started getting all excited about in-housing. But I mean, this has been something that's gone on for years. And my first job in the industry was at Lintas, which doesn't exist anymore, but that was Lever in-house advertising services.
Yeah.
So I think it's a bit of a pendulum. I mean, my view is that, it's an additional challenge, competitor, you might even call it, that we have to deal with. I've always, for the vast majority of my career, worked in creative industries, so creative agencies. I've always existed throughout my career in an industry that's massively oversupplied, a hugely oversupplied industry. And my belief system is that the agencies throughout my career that have thrived are agencies that have been truly creative businesses. I mean, I think a lot of agencies use the word creativity to describe the sector that they're in rather than what they actually are.
Yeah.
And my belief and my strategy has always been that if you genuinely are a creative business, with all that entails, and I think some of the fundamentals haven't changed, fantastic strategists, fantastic account people and business people that are really trusted partners to the clients, fantastic creative leadership, leaders that are able to, and a culture that attracts the best talent to your business, and a culture that allows that talent to thrive. I think that's all. My view is that has been and will continue to be a winning formula. I think some clients will still choose for various reasons to take things in-house. I personally see a pendulum in that, though. I see clients take stuff in and take stuff back out.
Yeah.
Maybe parts of it will permanently reside with the client, maybe parts won't. I don't see it as an existential threat.
Sure. And do you have any significant existential threats that you do see as a threat? I mean, technology has a way of creeping up on people, and then it's very disruptive, and it causes a problem. I mean, I think agency is obviously a very people-based business, and ideas and creativity probably be the last thing to be disrupted by the sort of binary nature of computers. I think we know that well. But I mean, you know, there are platforms developing, certainly in the media buying space that changes that, but perhaps not the creative space, and for all the reasons that you've laid out already.
I don't really have anything to add to that. I think that technology will continue to play a bigger and bigger part across the marketing services spectrum. As you say, it's going to affect different parts in different ways. It will affect every part of the industry in some way. I mean, I think, production. So, for example, creative agencies. I mean, obviously, the whole production industry has been massively disrupted several times through my career through technology. I mean, I don't know if anybody in the industry, I don't know if anybody under the age of 30 knows what a chromalin is anymore. Maybe some people do. Maybe I don't know. But I think that so and these are disruptions. So I hesitate to say there's no existential threats, but I don't see one. I do see very big challenges. I see, and those challenges are the things we're familiar with. Changing nature of consumer behavior. We're not really sure what kind of geopolitical world we're going to emerge into when we come out of this. There's the hunt for talent. I think that is we are people businesses, and that is a cliche, but really all our businesses is talent and culture. And to be great businesses, we have to sort of be jealously acquisitive of the best people. And we have to equally, if not more importantly, we have to have organizational cultures that allows those people, allows our teams to outperform our competitors' teams. That those things remain true. Which is not to say we should be bury our head in the sand with regard to technology. But I think technology is a tool rather than our business, if that makes sense.
Fantastic. And to sort of wrap up, Chris, I've seen you've obviously had some leadership roles in some very large and successful creative businesses, and culture is something that obviously is central to your sort of management and leadership thesis. How have you sort of managed? I mean, does culture shift with its leaders, or is it something that's in the room that a leader sort of massages into what he wants it to be, or how do you evolve the culture from one organization you've been in to the new organization, or is it a tapestry of one's experience? I mean, how does that? Why do two organizations have different leadership?
Why do they have different culture? Or different
why is it different? If you were at Grey historically and you're responsible for the culture there, and then you move to Havas and you're responsible for the culture there, how different are those two cultures?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Well, I mean, culture is this. So it's a funny thing, because on one hand it is extremely amorphous. It's kind of like an ether that you can't really see or touch or feel. Oh, sorry, you can't see or touch. But at the other end, I think at the same time it's a very physical thing, and you can feel it. So and by that, what I mean, you can go and spend a week in different organizations. Anytime you have a group of people organized to trying to achieve a task, there is a culture within that group, and sometimes groups are quite self-aware about that and will have conscious conversations about the culture that they want to have, that they believe will make them succeed. In other organizations, culture is sort of maybe never spoken about, or spoken about in a self-deluding way, where people will tell you what the values of the organization are, but anybody that spends 2 minutes there will understand that the actual behaviors and values of the company bear no relationship at all to the thing they write on the website. So I think that culture is the defining experience for many people as part of any sort of team, whether it be whatever sort of organization, a hospital, school, an advertising agency. And in actual fact, a good question to ask, I think, if on your first day or your first week at a new organization, is to sit at your desk and ask the person next to you or somebody at the water cooler or whatever it is, ask them what do I need to do to get on around here? And I think if you can get an honest answer to that question, that is a pretty good rough rule of thumb to what the actual culture in that organization is, as opposed to what the company claims. I think that though the culture ultimately does boil down to the behaviour of the leader or the leaders. Now, in a high functioning team, I think what happens is the leaders and possibly a wider group define what kind of culture they think they need in order to enable their teams to outperform. But the leaders work out for themselves what are the behaviours and actions they need to take in order for that culture to start to become a reality. But it's a funny thing, because an effective culture kind of both ultimately will be defined by the behaviors of the leaders. And it's better to not write it down but behave in the right way than to write down a load of stuff that you'd like to be but behave in a completely different way. And of course, best of all is to write it down and be consistent with that. So I suppose it's a long answer to your question, but if you talk about Havas and Gray, I mean, my roles in those two organizations are very different, and the environment that those two organizations exist within are very different. Havas is part of a big entertainment group. Gray is part of WPP. But if I'm in a leadership in both those organizations, and I am still fundamentally, the same person between the two, then there will inevitably, it's not because of me, it will be true of anybody, there will inevitably be some points of cultural similarity between the Gray when I was there and Havas now that I'm at Havas. And that's because I was in leadership positions at both, and culture is primarily the behavior of leaders.
Brilliant. Chris, well, look, thanks very much indeed. That's a very interesting sort of 20, 30 minutes there. So today we've had Chris Hirst on the Creative Leaders podcast. Perhaps we can revisit 6 months down the line when no doubt the landscape has changed again.
Indeed. I hope so. Thanks for having me.
You've been listening to the Movidiam podcast. Movidiam is a world-class network of production talent complemented by secure tools that blend hiring, communication, and payments. Find out more at movidiam.com.